Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for joining us here at Hudson Institute. We are really being adaptable today as we rely on airlines and airports. So thank you all for your patience online. Thank you all for being with us in person today. It is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce my friend, Josh Hammer. He is the senior editor-at-large of Newsweek, a syndicated columnist through Creators Syndicate, and a fellow with both the Edmund Burke Foundation and the Palm Beach Freedom Institute. He's the host of The Josh Hammer Show. He is the author of a wonderful and timely book, which I'm thrilled to be able to discuss with him today. And just as a brief note, for those of you who track my work, I'm Rebeccah Heinrichs, a senior fellow here at Hudson Institute, run our Keystone Defense Initiative. And though my area of expertise and focus is on nuclear deterrence, strategic deterrence, watching how allies and axes develop so that we can deter major power conflict, one of the issues that I've been tracking very carefully is, one, the development of an axis that is growing, and then also watching what our allies are doing. And then also here at home, been really focused on how Americans are responding to what Israel has been enduring since October 7th, with the behavior of the Iran regime and its funding of proxies throughout the region, and then domestically the American response to the rise of anti-Semitism, because I believe all of these issues will directly affect how the United States sees itself and our role in the world, and then our ability to deter major power war. And so it's my honor to be able to discuss this book with you, Josh. I told him I'm so sorry. I'm going to take you right off an airplane, and then we're going to jump right into discussing really serious things. But that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to start and just kind of go through the development of your book. So you begin in your book talking about the time that you visited Treblinki in Poland. And then you move into going into Israel after October 7th and seeing some of the carnage and the fallout from that. So just talk to me about those two experiences and how you related to them.
Sure. So it's great to be here with you, and sorry for all the travel delays and everything, but I'm glad that this event still worked out nonetheless. So I went to Kfar Aza and the Nova Music Festival site. All of this, it was in January 2024, so last January. So it was just a few months after October 7th. And my oldest brother-in-law, Rebeccah, lives in a town called Netivot, actually, which is a small city in southern Israel. It's only about 5 miles from Gaza, actually. He is Baal Teshuvah, as we would say in Judaism. So he's become very religious. So he's Black Hat, and even he, like a very religious man who has, or we think we know the answers to all the big questions, like why do good things or why do bad things happen to good people and so forth. Even he met me earlier that day in Sderot, which is right on the border with Gaza. They've been shellacked with more rockets than any other city in all of Israel since Hamas took over. Even he, when he saw me that day, when I said to him that I was going to go to Kfar Aza and Nova, I could see his jaw drop, and he's like, why? Are you willing to risk this damage to your neshama, to your soul? So you like to think that you know what you're getting in for, but actually going there and seeing it is something entirely different. But the book also, this opening segment of the book also has an uplifting end to it, actually, because you're walking there through this unspeakable atrocity. And, it's no exaggeration, Kfar Aza, this one kibbutz, it's literally on the fence. I cannot exaggerate. It is literally abut the fence. And there's a kilometer and a half of no man's land, and then there's Gaza right there, right? And wrecked out homes, but the toughest thing to see is really the children's toys. You literally see ripped off stuffed animals in the streets. This one home that the IDF has allowed you to go walk into, they actually put the last WhatsApp message of this husband and wife before they were murdered on the wall. They translate to English from Hebrew so you can read it. But it ends on an uplifting note, actually, because at that moment I was there for probably an hour walking around, and my soul is in a very rough part. And then I started to hear some guitar stringing and some singing. And you walk a little further, and you see that there were these two Haredi Jewish guys, so ultra-Orthodox as the media would refer to them. Not a big fan of that term, but neither here nor there. And they're just singing, strumming guitar, smiling ear to ear. And the delegation I was with included a lot of the soldiers, of the IDF soldiers. So they kind of wander over on the same time that I wander over. And we all kind of just formed this like impromptu like circle and like hold hands and like sing and dancing there. And it was like a very poignant reminder that this is the story of the Jewish people, right? It's just like pogrom after pogrom, exile after exile, tragedy after tragedy. And yet we just have this insatiable desire to live. I mean, that's kind of the meaning of the phrase, Am Yisrael Chai, the children of Israel live, the people of Israel live, because we want to live. And it was just a very, very powerful moment. I mean, one of those moments that will just stay with me for the rest of time there. And it was, the only other place I ever felt like that was Treblinka. And I think that American Jews can sometimes overdo it a little bit when it comes to kind of emphasizing the Holocaust. My own 2 cents is that if you're trying to encourage your fellow Jews to be more religious, talking about the Holocaust is not a good way to do it. I mean, if you like literally like pitching 6 million dead Jews is not a particularly inspiring message to fellow Jews to become more religious. So I'm not a big fan of that whole approach. But having said that, it does weigh on your conscience. And I keep a rock on my desk at all times. This is in the book as well, from the crematorium of Auschwitz that a rabbi gave me many years ago. So I literally keep that on my desk at all times just to remind me who I am day to day. So I do think about it, but ultimately, Rebeccah, my life, and I would encourage Jews and Christians alike, all of our lives be guided more by the singing and the remembrance as to who we are and why we're here, and less so the tragedies that have happened along the way.
Not only is it just very well documented, just the details that you include, it's beautifully written. It's really lovely. So, just would encourage all of you to get your copy. I want to move into it. You make a really interesting point this is in the Israel and Civilization chapter. You talk about this concept that really defines really what civilization is, what the West is. You talk about Imago Dei is in Latin. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, this is from the book, page 47 for those following along. Fundamentally, Josh writes, this establishes a supreme individual mandate to live an ethical life, talking about this principle of being created in the image of God, Imago Dei. One with certain moral, behavioral, and legal parameters. Okay. To talk to me about the connection to Judaism and that concept.
Sure. Yeah, so my argument in the earlier chapters of the book, so the book does a lot of things. The title is kind of misleading, to be honest with you. This is really not a book just about the state of Israel. I mean, you'll note the cover is not kind of a blue and white Star of David Magen David. This is not just kind of a Hasbara book, shall we say. It's frankly just a lot more than that, and I very intentionally wanted to do something a little bit different there. The book was written, and I'll get to the question obviously, but the book was written not necessarily in response to the October 7th pogrom, but in response to the world's reaction to the pogrom. Mm-hmm. The world had this clarion moment, Rebeccah, where it could have decided to, see this horrific incident between a 7th century medieval Islamist death cult on the one hand and this free and flourishing beacon of light and wealth and joy and prosperity and human Bible. I mean, like things that like decent people should believe in. And the world was confused as to who to stand with. So I basically looked at all this. And, full disclosure, I actually was going to write a totally different book. I had my proposal with my agent for a totally different book. And then I saw what happened and the reaction. I was like, oh my God, I have to switch gears. So the book is fundamentally about the Jews, the Bible, and the West. And the Jewish state of Israel, the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, has a role to play in this for sure. But because of that basis, these earlier chapters are really dedicated towards a little more history, philosophy, Bible, Torah, we would say, just trying to kind of remind people as to the roots of where we come there. And I do argue that Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, this, the divine image imperative, I call it. In Hebrew, we would say B'Tselem Elohim. In Latin, it's Imago Dei. I argue that it's a single foundational, ethical, moral undergird for all of Western civilization. Really.
I agree with that.
For everything.
Yeah.
If you accept the assertion that man is made in God's image, I mean, to be clear, we are not God, but that means that we have a spark of the divine. Then that means that we all have genuine moral human worth. Think about this. I mean, look, I'm a lawyer by background, a clerk for federal judge. I'm a constitutional nerd. Okay, this is one of my passions there. I love the Declaration of Independence. I mean, I'm born on Lincoln's birthday. Lincoln referred to the Declaration as the apple of gold, where the Constitution is this surrounding frame of silver. I love this stuff, right? But think about what Jefferson actually wrote in the Declaration. He famously says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. He's famously borrowing this language from John Locke, writing about a century prior over in England. So the question, Rebeccah, arises, and I've asked myself this many times, is it actually truly earnestly self-evident for every single human being in the world? To kind of put like a fine point on this, would such an assertion be self-evident to the goat herder in the mountains of Afghanistan? And I would have to submit to you that the answer to that is no. The reason, though, that men like John Locke and Thomas Jefferson thought it was self-evident was because they were philosophizing and thinking in a certain milieu, in a certain context, in a certain overarching framework there. And that framework is the biblical framework, is the Judeo-Christian worldview that ultimately has Genesis 1:27 and the assertion, the underpinning of genuine, equal moral dignity and worth right there at the bottom there. So, I mean, take some current kind of public policy fights today, for instance, there. The whole fight, when it comes to so-called DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion there. I think the soundest basis, frankly, for opposing something like DEI, this kind of crass classification of individuals based on their race or their ethnicity or their religion or whatever, the soundest basis for opposing that, frankly, is by appealing to no less a source than Genesis 1:27 itself. Because if we're all equal, as men like Lincoln, Jefferson, and Locke held us to be, citing Scripture, then things like DEI necessarily have to crumble, I think.
Right. We're going to get into that. You've been, it's so, Josh is one of these people who I'm like, he's tracking the same things that I'm tracking. He's reading the same stuff and I can tell, so I was born on Reagan's birthday. So I turn to the Lincoln's construct often of the apple of gold and the Constitution being the silver frame around the apple of gold too. And that's how you have to understand the principle and then the legal framework. That if you only get the legal framework without the principles of the Declaration of Independence, you lose what America is or how we see ourselves. Let's skip, because you just kind of hit that in your right versus wrong chapter. I want to get into, though, where I think bring us to where we are in the American context, and because I think this is what is so important and timely, as we need somebody articulating this well, and I think you do. Everybody seems to be, or many people on the right, on the political right, want to outdo themselves in their anti-neoconness. Okay, so I talk a lot. I just wrote my first book on just war and nuclear deterrence. And so I spend some time talking about what America is also first. And then I talk about conservative internationalism or conservative moral realism.
Sure.
So how do you define what the bad things about the post 9/11 response, and then how you see what the United States, how we should be course correcting?
Sure.
So that's going to be my first question, give you an answer. And then we'll talk about kind of where we are with how people are responding to Israel and getting it wrong.
Okay, sure. Yeah, a lot to unpack there, obviously. Yeah, so I mean, Rebeccah, you and I have had these conversations for many years now, right? About what the right's foreign policy actually should be, right? So I mean, neoconservatism, insofar as I understand it, the actual definition refers to the Norm Podhoretz's, the Irving Kristol's of the 1960s. These former liberals who were horrified by the Democrats' reaction to the Cold War, essentially, and then moved right, and they had the New York intellectuals and all that there. So that is like the Wikipedia dictionary definition of neoconservative, right? The term nonetheless gets applied more broadly, I think, starting around the Bush administration to refer to Bush era and in the light or in the mold of Bush era foreign policy decisions there. And I don't necessarily object, to be clear, to using that term in that context, as long as it is used specifically in a very clear manner there. And I do have a whole chapter on this in the book, chapter 7, talking about Bush-era neoconservatism, why I personally reject it, and why I think it's an incorrect framework, and frankly not a particularly good framework either for U.S.-Israel relations. But the key is to actually make sure we're defining things correctly there. So to me, kind of the grand adapted neoconservative kind of paean of the Bush administration would be George W. Bush's second inaugural address, where he famously espouses the so-called freedom agenda there. And I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have it exactly memorized, but he essentially espouses this notion that all human beings throughout the world aspire to the exact same idiosyncratic ideals of freedom and liberty. And then the logical corollary of that is that there is perhaps some role to play for the United States and or our allied powers, if to use force, if necessary, to kind of spread that message and that ideal there. That fundamentally is what I reject. I think that John Quincy Adams had it a lot better in this famous quote of his from 1821, back when he was Secretary of State, not quite president yet, where he famously said, and I'm paraphrasing again, but he said, "America does not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Rather, America is the well-wisher of everyone's liberty, but we are the guarantor of liberty only for ourselves."
So let me stop you. So this kind of gets back to the question, though, that you discussed earlier about, does the goat herder in Afghanistan share these principles and understand these things are self-evident? We might say, so to free him, what does that mean?
Yeah,
He's pretty
exactly.
happy the way. Yeah. So okay. So but to your point, though, but that term now is sort of used as a smear to anybody who wants to defend an ally. And people might disagree as a matter of prudence what to do about Ukraine at this point, or what to do about the Red Sea. And we're not. These things are hard. Nobody has a monopoly on wisdom on what to do on these things. But it seems like the term neoconservatism is used now to smear anybody who believes that there is a just and prudent point at which, based on things that are both ethical and moral and in our interests, that the United States might prudently want to support or engage in.
Correct. So there are, it's such a funny term, right? I mean, there's the technical definition, which is literally like 1960s leftists turned to the right, which has nothing to do with today's discourse. Then it essentially gets revived from the dead to describe Bush-era foreign policy. I've never really done a personal deep dive as to why exactly they resuscitated this term to refer to, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, but there's that. And then there's this straw man use of the term, which is primarily how it is used in today's discourse, to refer to anyone who does not agree with the Koch brothers' conception of American foreign policy, or Ron Paul's perception of American foreign policy. There,
which is what? Let's explain. Let's tease that out.
Sure. So, essentially, that America just simply, if I'm steel manning it, if I'm painting in the strongest possible terms, it's basically the old Fortress America claim that America has no tangible, concrete interests that are worth protecting and preserving, really beyond our borders there. I mean, there's so many problems with this that it's hard to know where to begin, right? But I mean, one of the most obvious ways, these folks like to cite some of the American founders. George Washington, in his farewell address, famously warns Americans about getting themselves into foreign entanglements, and this is kind of one of their favorite lines there. But America also fought the first and second Barbary Wars, like around this exact same time, like during the Thomas Jefferson presidency there. That was actually the original reason that America really kind of fleshed out its navy, was due to the Barbary pirates there. So we've been involved extraterritorially, whether we like it or not, essentially since the beginning.
We believe that we should be able to have commerce.
Yes.
And that pirates, we should probably just destroy the pirates. So in the case of the Houthis, they're Islamist pirates.
Yes.
We destroy pirates.
Yeah,
That's what the Navy does.
Yeah, there's a long and illustrious history in this country, you might say, of the United States Navy being used prudentially to take down confrontational radical Islamist pirates. There was a very long history of that. It's funny, like when I was learning history in my public school, middle school, high school, we basically went from the Revolutionary War to the War of 1812. We literally just skipped the Barbary Wars. I'm not sure if that was due to political correctness. I don't know, but we totally just skipped it. But very important chapter of American history, actually. But no, people totally use the term, usually neocon today. And again, I don't even describe. I'm a realist. I'm a nationalist realist. I have a whole chapter laying out my case for this. But even I take umbrage when I hear certain of these folks kind of besmirch others as neocons, because they're not using it in good faith at all. They're not making an intellectual case, as I make in the book, against Bush's freedom agenda on grounds that you and I just discussed of how the goat herd doesn't agree with this. No, they're not saying that. They're using it as pejorative to basically say that if you agree with any conception of having any allies abroad, relying on any allies abroad there, God forbid you have some sort of arms arrangement there, you're a terrible, terrible, terrible neocon. And then at its absolute worst, there was a whole controversy last week, actually. So Mark Levin on his national radio show really kind of lit into Tucker Carlson. And part of this was he kind of went off on the use of the word neocon, which Mark alleges in its most insidious form is really used as a pejorative for Jew. Now, it's not always used as pejorative for Jew. I think there are a lot of non-Jews who get besmirched with neocons. I was going to say I think I'm talking to one. But
the Gentile over
right,
here.
but there definitely are some people who use the term primarily. I mean, I've seen so many tweets over the past year or so. Those neocons, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin. Well, first of all, I mean, Dave Rubin's a good friend, but he doesn't really talk much about foreign policy. I mean, but why are you talking about people with the name Shapiro, Levin, or Rubin? I mean, the question kind of answers itself. I'm not saying that every time a person uses the term, it's with that intention, but it definitely is sometimes. And for that reason, I was kind of circumspect and wary about kind of laying out the intellectual case against it because I didn't want to give more ammunition to the bad forces. But it's what I believe. I genuinely do believe in this kind of nationalist realism foreign policy, and I thought it was worth laying out the case.
Well, and I do think I've gone back and forth for myself on whether or not I should take this on directly, and I've sort of waded into it a little bit before because for the same reason. Is it wise then to give it more oxygen or not? But I do think if you study history, we're seeing patterns of some of this kind of behavior. The response to October 7th and these pro-Hamas protests, the rise of anti-Semitism, which you mostly see kind of coming from the sort of the political left or being supported by foreign adversaries, Qatar funding a lot of it, or Iran funding a lot of it. But then on the right, you are seeing now tolerance for anti-Semitic arguments or the rewriting of America's role in World War II. And so I have now called whatever this is. There's disagreement about what we should call it. And I thought it really is, I call it the 1939 Project, which it is something similar to the 1619 Project in its sort of rewriting history in order to then make a different argument about what we should do now as a matter of policy.
Yeah.
And then because if you disagree with what the historical narrative, which I think is pretty close to reality, we can disagree. You can have a conversation about specific things in it, but that the United States was on the side of the right guys, and that the Allies were right, and the Axis was bad.
Yeah.
And then what came after that was essentially good, and then some of the things maybe in the post-World War II international order you can disagree with it, or maybe think that we need to restore or get rid of some of it, et cetera. But that's kind of where we are. And so I'm concerned that this 1939 effort to dismantle and to rewrite that historical outcome is being used now for things like weakening the United States' commitment to NATO, weakening the United States' commitment to Israel.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am on kind of observing this. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, but Rebeccah, the world's greatest historian, thinks that Churchill was the bad guy in World War II.
Right. Exactly.
No, we live in funny times, right? I think that the people who are going that far, I mean, like 1939. Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump did choose America first as his motto, and it's the correct philosophy. Like every American patriot believes in America first. Like to me, that's not even a point worth debating. It's just
the words themselves in terms of what they mean.
It's just so obvious. I mean, duh. I mean, like we all agree with that, right? But with the specific word choice, it does evoke, obviously, Lindbergh and the 1939 Project. So there was always a danger, I think, just because of the historical connotations of the term, of certain people kind of glomming onto it and then seizing it for more nefarious purposes of sorts there. And that is where we find ourselves today. Now, I think the people that take it as far as the aforementioned purportedly great historian Darryl Cooper, who are literally criticizing folks like Churchill, which just... I mean, the mind just wants to say what is happening? I mean, I just can't wrap my head around it. But I think what they're fundamentally upset about is the Pax Americana, is this emergence of America as a superpower, right? In the post World War II era. The problem, there's so many problems with that, obviously, but one of the obvious problems is that the Soviet Union also emerges as a superpower in the aftermath of World War II, and something has to happen to oppose communism. or else the world would look very, very, very different today. And the president on whose birthday you were born had a very clear message as to what to do about that. We win, they lose there. In my mind, all of that is entirely correct, the way that plays out. Where I start to have some bones to pick is after the fall of the Berlin Wall and kind of the emergence of this kind of intellectual hubris when it comes to kind of.
Sure.
But yes, we're facing some real issues today, even within certain pockets of the American right. And this is also one of the reasons why I wrote this book. Obviously, at its worst, Rebeccah, at its absolute worst, there are some people who, and this really pains me as someone who's Jewish, who many of my best friends are Christian, but there are some people that are genuinely trying to tear Christians and Jews apart. I think that there are some, we know the problems with kind of the Anti-Defamation League and various kind of left-wing Jews who say, beware of Christian nationalism, this boogeyman that doesn't really exist, right? But there increasingly are some self-proclaimed Christian activists, I have no idea what their actual faith are, who are essentially making a case to divorce themselves from the Jewish people, and by extension, the Jewish state. This is very dark stuff, because America has virtually no history of Christian anti-Semitism. It would be an extraordinary shame if it were actually to start now. Thank God it's still extremely small, but trying to make sure it stays extremely small is definitely one of the reasons why I wrote this book as well.
Well, no, and that's why I think it's so important to talk about it then too, because we want to make sure that we. I think we've gotten to the point now where it's good to point it out, and I've got colleagues here at Hudson who are pointing it out online. Mike Duran does a nice job of doing it too, and because I think you have to. We are, you can study history and then see what you can pick what role you want to play in this era of history. And do you want to be the person who lets it go on without calling it out, or do you want to call it out so that we don't repeat kind of the worst forms? So my last question then is, so you do make a strong argument then for why the United States' alliance with Israel is in our interests and not divorced from the ethical question. So realism does not have to be divorced. I would argue that true realism, properly understood, always accounts for the principles of the nation and for instance, you can see which country you would want to align with and which one you wouldn't because they're contrary to your interests and values. Talk about that. Why you see? I think you call it prudential realism. I think on page 141. But talk about why the U.S.-Israel alliance is still rooted in our interests and not divorced from the ethics and the principles of our nations.
So I think there's varying degrees of realism and how we can conceive of different actors through that lens. So for instance, there's a real case to be made that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, that these are valuable allies for multiple reasons, not just the massive investment sums of money, but also, at least during the first Trump administration, at least, because they were seen as a bulwark against Iranian hegemony. And Saudi Arabia, it was never confirmed, but there were a lot of rumors circulating on social media and parts of the internet that they allowed their airspace to be used not to shoot down the Iranian rockets into Israel, but at least to have the Israeli rockets intercept them.
Oh yeah. Jordan did. It was the Saudis.
So Jordan definitely did, but the Saudi, I'm pretty sure they did that as well. So there's a real case we made there for realism on those grounds. But look, we obviously share nothing in common with Saudi Arabia as far as our culture, our history, our way of life, nothing. So that's kind of like a baseline level of realism, and then maybe call it like a realism plus, like a realism that also has something more than just realism. J.D. Vance gave a very interesting speech before he was vice president, back when he was Senator J.D. Vance. He gave a speech at Quincy Institute of all places, which is not one of my favorite shops necessarily around this town. But he went in there last May and in a very hostile setting made a full-fledged case for U.S.-Israel relations on realist foreign policy grounds. But it wasn't just realist. He made sure to say that as long as America remains a predominantly Christian country, people are going to care a lot about this tiny sliver of land between the river and the sea, the very river and the sea that these shouting morons on campus can't seem to identify. And that's true. A very, very substantial percentage of Americans really do care about the fate of this sliver of land on just pure tactical realist grounds. And we can't just pretend that's not a real thing. It's absolutely a real thing there. And by the way, American statesmen from the beginning have understood that too. I have a whole chapter about the Anglo-American tradition and the children of Israel, the Jewish people. I mean, John Quincy Adams was basically a proto-Zionist before Zionism was a thing. John Quincy Adams had beautiful writings, praising the idea of the Jews recongregating in their ancestral homeland there. This was almost a century before Herzl was writing anything of note. So we have to care about that. We simply have to there. But Israel also satisfies all the various reasons for being a traditional realist ally in any sense of the term as well. So to give just one very concrete example, this is one of my favorite examples there. So, last summer before Israel took out Yahya Sinwar in October, and even before they got Hassan Nasrallah in the bunker in Beirut in September, they took out a lot of jihadists along the way. It was kind of like marching up the pecking order of Hezbollah before it came the big guy, Nasrallah, in the bunker there. And two of the jihadis that they got in Hezbollah were Fuad Shakur and Ibrahim Akil. And not a whole lot of people know these two men's names, but Fuad Shakur was the mastermind of the 1983 U.S. Marine barracks bombings in Beirut. Ibrahim Akil was the mastermind of the U.S. Embassy bombing in Beirut that same year. So those slaughtered 241 Marines and 60 to 70 people respectively there. Turns out the U.S. State Department had a bounty on these two men's head for over 4 decades, like literally since the bombings. $7 million on the head of Akil, $5 million on the head of Shakur. Nothing happened. I mean, they were free roaming around Lebanon, Iran, wherever they were going in the region there. Literally nothing happened until the IDF took them out. So, I mean, I get asked on college campuses and elsewhere a lot, what does the U.S. get out of this relationship? Well, the U.S. gets a lot, actually. Missile defense, your area, technology. There's a lot that we get. But probably the, most concrete, lowest hanging fruit possible, true conservative foreign policy realism that we get, is we are allowed to basically hand off our baton to our sole loyal ally in the region, and we literally get dead jihadis who have multi-million-dollar State Department bounties on their head. I mean, that is no small matter. That's a pretty big deal, actually.
Well, and really, it's sort of, you kind of unpack that, and Israel's enemies are our enemies.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, kind of fundamental to a coherent foreign policy rooted in America's interests are making a distinction between our friends and our enemies.
Exactly.
And Israel is a great friend of the United States. And so it's in our interest to make sure that it's strong and secure and that our alliance remains. I even thought after the pager attacks, I'm like, why would anybody decide to be against the Israelis at this point? I'm very happy we're on the side of Israel, knowing what they can do.
Rebeccah, as someone married to an Israeli, the amount of jokes about the pager thing were just insane. A lot. Anyone who knows Israeli culture, there's all these jokes about Israelis selling like electronics in the first place. There's a lot of stereotypes about that. So when this happened, in my in-laws' household, it was just jokes galore. But you're totally right. It was a heck of a stunt, honestly.
It was wonderful. All right, I want to take some questions from you all before we run out of time. You all have been so patient. If anybody has any questions? I've got one more. If you don't, Dan.
Just a real quick one. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for making it. Just real quick, I delved real quickly into the book before you arrived. And obviously we know about all the demonstrations, all the crazy anti-Semitism that happens in college campuses. And there was a spike after October 7th.
Oh, yeah.
Do you see now, traveling the country, any reversal in that trend to any significant, non-significant extent? I'm just curious.
Hard to say. I don't think. It's still pretty bad in spots. We saw the videos at Columbia a few weeks ago of them, renaming this library after some, terrorist who has blood on his hands. So but having said that, Columbia did assuage the Trump administration's attempts to crack down on those students. That's the difference, right? Is that now we have an administration that is actually willing to try to enforce the law, to try to actually make an example of some of these people who are here on visas and so forth there. So that's the obvious difference. But look, as recently as this February, I had an anti-Semitic protester at Arizona State in Phoenix. It was an event literally about big tech, like nothing remotely related to this there, but like the person just knows that I'm Jewish and a big supporter of Israel, so just had like a protester, like, you support genocide. I mean, you know, the guy walks out after like a few minutes, after like 30 seconds of yelling, so not a huge inconvenience to my personal day, to be honest with you. He just looks like a fool. But I think it's heading on the right trajectory. But look, the thing about anti-Semitism, I was actually talking about this with my wife just a couple days ago. It's never going to leave. Anyone who thinks that they have the cure for anti-Semitism, I mean, get out of here. It's not going to happen there. I'm not saying that we should just be completely complacent and accept it. It's worth fighting back because it's inherently wrong, and it's here, there, and everywhere symptomatic of broader societal rot. That's kind of the key part. That's really why Americans should care about it, whether you're Jewish or not, is because historically no nation has turned on its Jewish population ever, and the nation has been better off for it. Like there's literally not a single example in human history. So that's why Americans should care about it. But it's not like it's going to go away. I mean, it's been around at least since Pharaoh oppressed the Israelites, you know, around the time of Moses. I mean, in the book of Exodus. It's probably not going to go anywhere. So it's kind of just parts of God's plan for the Jews. But again, I'm not accepting full complacency, but I'm just saying that it's not ever going to go away either.
So let me just, I'm gonna end with this. So I think it's worth always fighting back, because I agree that the way I see it is anti-Semitism correlates with societal rot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so so anywhere you look where you see anti-Semitism, the country's not doing well in some ways, and so in a democratic republic such as we have, it's good for the citizens of this country to recognize that's bad, push back on it, and not to give it oxygen. My colleague here, Walter Russell Mead, is very just eloquent on discussing this, and I'm going to end with a quote. He said in an interview, he said, quote, "Anti-Semitism is both a sort of mental impairment and a barrier to learning. If you think that the Jews control the banks, you don't understand finance, and you will never understand it because you have this happy conspiracy theory and you think you already know everything. If you think the Jews control the weather with their space lasers, you're not going to bother to study meteorological science. A society in which this kind of anti-Semitism is prevalent is not going to be a sign of a society on the cutting edge of science or business or economics or anything else. In our society, these beliefs are toxic. They're terrible for the Jews, but they are actually poison to what makes America America." And I thought that was just beautifully said and so true. And so here at Hudson, we have just repeatedly tried to keep pushing this out there, especially since October 7th. But of course, Walter's been writing about this for many years. And so we here are committed to America's role in the world as pushing forward our own security, prosperity, and the freedom for the United States of America, but also to be a good ally to those who stand with us. And so real privilege to have you here, Josh. Thank you so much for writing the book. Again, I commend it to all of you. Thank you for being here. Please join me in thanking our author and friend, Josh.
Thank you so much. Thank you.